in. But right now, let's bring in our first guest of the day as we continue our 12 games in 12 weeks preview of the Syracuse football season, which is a part of our 100-day Fran Brown countdown to opening kickoff. Now, as we are 2 full weeks into it, we bring in our first guest. He is the voice of the Yellow Jackets. He is a Syracuse grad, Andy Demetra. Andy, always great to chat. And where are we at in the math here? I believe we're 94 days out from your return to Syracuse, if you're counting down the days on your calendar here.
All right, so if 94 for Syracuse, that means 87 for Tech as we open week 0 with FSU in Dublin. So duly noted.
Yeah, well, I say it's 94 to your game here, so 87 to the Syracuse Open. So 80 days until your opener. We got to backtrack 2 weeks off that for you. So yeah.
Well, it's a good thing that my passport is valid.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. Do you have all the proper things to get out of the country? Because you will be playing Georgia Tech and Florida State are opening the season, right? Week 0 in Dublin. That's got to be kind of fun, right, to open the things up this year.
We sure are. Now, Georgia Tech played in Dublin at Aviva Stadium in 2016 to open the season against Boston College. You may remember that. I remember that, Higo, because that was actually my first game as voice of the Yellow Jackets. So that was quite a whirlwind, but as I recall, my head was spinning, but Jackets got a touchdown in the last minute to pull ahead, and a good way to endear yourself to a new fan base is you call a last-second win. So I was fortunate to cover that 8 years ago, and the loop will become complete here in about a little less than 2 months.
That is good, because you don't want to lose that game, because then there's always the option of them leaving you in another country, which is which would be no good, not a good way to start the year. But we got our guy Andy Demetra with us, and Andy, first I want to start off with some sad news with your broadcast. I pass along our condolences to you and everyone that's part of the Georgia Tech broadcast. Your engineer Miller Pope passed away unexpectedly over the weekend, and I think everyone in the ACC know Miller a little bit. So just want to say how sorry we are, because he was always great and always helpful whenever we'd come your way.
I appreciate that. For those who didn't know Miller, there was not a broadcast or broadcaster in Atlanta sports radio over the past 4+ decades who wasn't impacted by Miller. Anybody in our business knows that having a good engineer makes all the difference in the world. So he brought so many seminal moments in Atlanta radio to life, and just as sweet and selfless a guy as you could hope to meet. He was very charmingly cynical, and I know he thought very highly of all the other broadcasters around the ACC. So we appreciate that. We'll definitely be missing him come the fall.
I'll give you one story here, because, we were down there. It was before you were the voice of the Jackets. It was Syracuse's first year in the ACC, so 2013. So Paulie and I are there. We're getting ready for whatever. Miller comes in to check, our sideline equipment and get our wireless stuff. He's like, you guys know your equipment's illegal, right? What are you talking about? We were using stuff so old. We were on airline frequencies or something. So he was helpful in stopping us breaking federal law. So that was very useful information to find out that day.
You worry so much about running afoul of the FCC. I didn't know you could also run afoul of the FAA.
No.
So I learned something new. But that was Miller, man. He knew everything front and back, inside and out, and he was just a tremendous resource and the cheapest therapist you could ever meet when things weren't going well for the Yellow Jackets and we needed to blow off some steam during commercial breaks. So for many reasons, we'll definitely miss him.
Yeah, and we're glad. Otherwise, Paulie might be in the clink if he hadn't helped us out of that one. So we got Andy Demetra here. We're previewing week by week here. Big picture stuff, getting ready for the football season. Before we get into the Jackets here, Andy, what's your view on what's going on with the ACC right now? There's lawsuits every other week. There's a season coming up, but nobody, I think, feels entirely stable about the future, however many years from now. What's your view from down in Atlanta of how this is all shaken out right now?
And I don't think it matters what conference you belong to, Brian. Nobody has a crystal ball on what the landscape of college football will look like 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 12 months from now. And that includes those of us in the ACC. It's a new era. I think having a 12-team playoff will collectively energize college football because you have so many teams whose seasons will become extended deeper into the regular season, who have something more meaningful to play for. And I think, in years past, you knew by end of September whether you were a legitimate contender for a playoff spot. Now, that barrier to entry is so much lower. And so that benefits schools like a Georgia Tech, a Virginia Tech, a Syracuse. Whereas, if you weren't winning that ACC regular season, the conference championship, your chance of playing in a playoff spot was basically nil. Now, but for those of us who maybe aren't in that blue blood category or in that blue blood conversation, I think it adds a little more energy, a little more intrigue as the regular season unfolds. That's kind of what I'm narrowing my focus on as we enter this new era of college football. As far as how things may evolve and the tectonic shifts of realignment and everything else in the ACC and otherwise. Gosh, I wish I knew, and if I did, I'd be the most sought-after consultant in college sports. So all I know is that Georgia Tech will have its opener August 24th, and once that ball is kicked in Tomey's leather, it'll feel like every other college football season. I think we can all be grateful for that.
Yeah, I think the playoff point is a very valid one, Andy, because there's a lot of schools, Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State, like they're in the mix every year. They make the playoffs, they don't. They're always right there. Like I look at Syracuse, and Georgia Tech has had years like this. In 2018, Syracuse won 10 games, and they got up as high as 13th in the country. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. They're 13th in the country. But they never had a shot at any of that stuff. Now, if you're like 13th in the country when the calendar goes to November, it's like a wild party because, right, you're in it with a chance. And it feels like, every school has one of those years, at least every now and again.
Yeah, 100%. And who knows what school may emerge from the ACC outside of maybe some of the usual suspects that could be competing for a top 12 spot this upcoming season. So I think that's what makes things really exciting, this year and in the years ahead in the ACC.
And, here we go into this year. What do you make? Obviously, there was a necessity to it as far as the future of the league. How do you think it's going to be to, have Stanford and Cal and SMU in the league this year?
It'll take some getting used to, I'll tell you that much. And Georgia Tech does not face any of the new schools this year. We don't play Cal until 2027 in Atlanta. Oddly enough, Georgia Tech and Cal played each other 4 different times in the 1930s. They actually played in the 1928 Rose Bowl that clinched Georgia Tech's second national title. So they do have some history with Cal. It's realignment. What is a conference anymore? What are conference borders anymore? It's going to be jarring, I think, to see some of those early matchups. But we'll all get used to it, and I'm sure by the end of the season, it'll just be business as usual. It will take some getting used to, though.
Yeah, the Orange game after the Jackets, there's a bye week the next week. Their game after that is Stanford coming to the Dome on a Friday night, and they do visit Cal later in the season. So big conference matchups. I still, it's more than 10 years in. I've finally gotten used to that Syracuse is in the ACC. So getting used to Stanford and Cal, it takes even more. Like, wait a minute, a roadie to California. That's in the league too. It's crazy to wrap your head around all this stuff.
Well, and now Syracuse is no longer the junior member of the ACC, so you have seniority and rank over other teams in the league. Yeah,
they could just take that, SMU. You're at the bottom rung right now. All right, Andy, this Georgia Tech team, I was wildly impressed what Brent Key was able to do in his first full year last year. Now he's gotten himself established, got the full year under his belt. What are you expecting here? Is he really launches into it here in year 2?
This could be as upbeat as Georgia Tech's fan base has felt in an off-season with its football team, at least since I've been here, going back 8 years, maybe since that 2014 ACC championship season. Now, I'm not suggesting that Georgia Tech will be the ACC champions, even though that would be their ambition. But you go 7-6, you become bowl eligible for the first time since 2018, you win a bowl game for the first time since 2016, and you return 17 starters, which is among the most, not just in the ACC, but in the nation. You got 9 starters back on offense, an offense that looked completely transformed last season. Spirits are definitely high. Now, what maybe counterbalances that, Brian, is if you look at ESPN's FPI, Georgia Tech has the 9th toughest strength of schedule in the country. In fact, of the top 20 strengths of schedule in the nation, 19 are from SEC and Big Ten schools. And then there's Georgia Tech. So it is going to be a gauntlet from week 0 to week 13 when they play Georgia. But this is a team that has a lot of returning experience, a lot of guys who have had meaningful snaps. It's not to say that they don't have some areas of uncertainty and unknowns from a personnel standpoint entering this season. But Brent Key put his identity on this program. They changed the culture. They got back into their winning ways, a winning season. And with all the returning experience they have back, spirits are really high about what this fall could hold for Georgia Tech.
Yeah, Syracuse is the other end of that. After spending a decade in the same division as Florida State and Clemson, neither are on the schedule this year, so they currently have the easiest schedule by that same ranking, at least among Power 4 teams out there, which is another thing I have to get used to saying Power 4 instead of Power 5. All right, you got the quarterback Haynes King back, you got the running back Jamal Haynes back. Like that's a pretty good place to start, right? When you're getting ready to get into a second year for a head coach.
No doubt. And Haynes King put together statistically as good of a season passing the football since maybe Reggie Ball or even farther back than that, Joe Hamilton. He was just a great orchestrator of the offense. I know he wants to lower his interception count, but the way he was able to establish his leadership, his touchdown field, and his running ability was really impressive and immediately won over the locker room and is the unquestioned leader of that offense. Jamal Haynes, just a really shifty back, all ACC. He's a pass-catching threat out of the backfield as well. He began his career as a slot receiver. He's a really dynamic chess piece that they can manipulate the field with. And then you can't forget about Eric Singleton Jr., who was runner-up for ACC Rookie of the Year at wide receiver, and Malik Rutherford, who was Georgia Tech's leading pass catcher by receptions last year. They returned 4 of their 5 offensive line starters. And by any metric you choose, Brian, the improvement in offensive line play was remarkable last year. So it's not just Haynes King and Jamal Haynes. There are a lot of other areas where Georgia Tech returns strength on the offensive side of the ball. And to quote Trilly Donovan on Twitter, sometimes the best gets are the ones you already have. They were able to retain their offensive coordinator, Buster Faulkner, who was sought after for some head coaching positions at Georgia State, at Middle Tennessee. They held on to him. He was the guy who was at the controls of that offense that just completely reshaped expectations last year. It's so good to have him back, along with all those returning starters that can make things a really fun offense to watch in 2024.
All right. Well, if Trilly said it, we'll have to roll with that. There's no reason to disagree with that stuff. All right, Eddie, I want to ask you this here, because obviously things have changed completely at Syracuse since you got to see one of the total wacky whatever the heck that end of the year offense was last year. So, but obviously new coach, Fran Brown, whole thing, lots of excitement here, recruiting in ways we've literally never seen before in 25, 30 years. And everyone here is excited. How far has that rippled out? What is the Syracuse Fran Brown noise down in Atlanta? Is it a blip, or is Syracuse starting to get noticed with what's going on?
I think anybody who pays attention to the ACC, Brian, whether it's down here at Georgia Tech or elsewhere, has to be very mindful of what Fran Brown is doing. And with some of the recruiting victories he's had this offseason, of course, there's winning the offseason and then there's winning the regular season. And so that's kind of the next step in him legitimizing himself and legitimizing all of the incoming talent he has with wins during the fall. That'll be the next step. But look, I think everybody anticipates that Syracuse will be an improved team. And that's the thing about the ACC. People expect Georgia Tech to be improved. People expect Virginia Tech to be vastly improved. People expect Syracuse to be improved, and Miami, with some of the talent they've courted out of the transfer portal. People are bullish on them being an improved team. Look, not everybody can be an improved team in the ACC. That's just the nature of conferences where teams cannibalize each other. So there are a lot of teams that are expected to take jumps and take that next step, but not everybody will be able to. So it's about who can do it when the games matter, and there's a winner and a loser. But, I think Fran Brown, He brought a lot of recruiting bona fides from where he had been in the past, and certainly right down the road from Georgia Tech. That has translated, no doubt, into some big wins on the recruiting trail this offseason. And we now know that timelines have become so accelerated in the transfer portal era that this is not, it doesn't have to be a slow burn process of progress for Syracuse. And so that'll make September 7th, when the Jackets come to the JMA Wireless Dome, pretty frisky early season matchup. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, he mentioned with teams that have bigger goals than maybe normal. Like that's a very big game, considering it'll be your third game, but week 2 of the season. And some of those other teams you mentioned, Virginia Tech and Miami, they will both be in the Dome this year, like the old Big East days. So those are some very important games coming up. Both those will be November games in the Dome, so something to look forward to. All right, Andy, last thing, and this may be an impossible question for you to answer because it has literally nothing to do with Georgia Tech other than that you are in Atlanta. The Syracuse sporting news that we are talking today is that Syracuse basketball just got a transfer named Lucas Taylor from Georgia State, which is also in Atlanta. So simply by the fact that you're in the same city, even though Georgia Tech did not play them last year, do you know anything at all about this guy just by having absorbed it from being vaguely nearby?
Oh, man, you put me on the spot there, Brian.
Yeah.
Other than Georgia State being about 1 mile down the road from Georgia Tech, I wish I could give you more acute intel on Lucas Taylor and being a 14-point-a-game scorer for Coach Hayes at Georgia State. That's about as far as my scouting report of him goes, unfortunately. But, hey, looking forward to see him. You know one thing, he'll see some familiar players whenever Georgia Tech and Syracuse meet this next basketball season, because those guys – they get together and do those afternoon runs during the summer. So I know that Georgia Tech's players are probably very aware of Lucas Taylor and his individual floor game for whenever Georgia Tech and Syracuse will link up this next season.
All right, Andy. I was going to say no is an acceptable answer of knowing anything about him. So you gave us slightly more than no.
I tried to say no as tactfully as possible.
No, that was a very tactful and pleasant no. So,
thank you.
Yeah, which is also more than we knew about this guy 3 days ago. So we'll take it. We'll take it. All right, Andy. Good stuff. Enjoy the summer. Looking forward to football when it comes back, and great to chat as always.
Pleasure. There you go. Looking forward to do it again.
All right, there he goes. Andy Demetra he'll be up in the Dome for a football game come that September the 7th as we continue our preview of Syracuse football. So